In this video, we're going to talk about scales and indexes, which are the end of the first part of the methods block. And scales are essentially instruments that allow us to turn qualitative constructs or concepts into quantitative. We're going to be able to assign them numerical values. And we do this in situations in which measuring this concept or construct is very difficult. Things like our self-esteem. So scales are going to be very useful, but we're going to see why. They always bear some degree of subjectivity. So we always should be able to back up the different choices we make when developing a scale with theory. They're going to consist of several response items, so several questions, if you will, that are going to be answered individually, and then later on they're going to be aggregated into a final score. So you can think about a case in which we have different people and we ask them different questions. They have to provide an answer to each of those questions, and then finally, through those answers, somehow we come up with one numerical score that measures the concept we are interested in the first place, and those questions are about. And there are different ways of building a scale. We're going to talk about Thurston and Likert scales. Let's see. So let's say we want to build a scale to measure self-esteem at work. So there's a multitude of reasons why we should not ask this directly. Going from maybe people don't tell you the truth because they fear being fired, or they underestimate their self-esteem or overestimate, etc. So we go through different steps to build a scale. First of all is we generate a set of potential scale items, essentially statements or questions that relate to the concept of interest. Better than doing it ourselves, it's a good idea if we get a set of people and we ask them to generate these statements. And it's not about how we specifically or these people specifically feel at work in terms of self-esteem, but rather about what are the possible answers that anyone could give us if we were to ask. So let's say that we come up with 5 items, items 1 to 5 over here, and we have item 1 saying, I feel good about my work on the job. So that's in principle good. Item 2 is, I am uncomfortable at work. That's negative. I feel like I make a useful contribution. That's good. I can't handle my job without assistance. That's bad. Or item 5, I learn from my colleagues. That should be good, right? So we have our 5 items. What do we do next? Well, point number 2 is we get a set of judges, different people, rate the items with respect to how much they favor the concept of interest, so how much they go in line with the concept of interest or opposite to it. And again, it's not about how these specific people agree or not with these items in their own case. It's about how much they think this statement reflects the concept of interest, self-esteem. And we could choose a scale going from 1 to 5, 1 to 11. It's up to us. Let's say we go from 1 to 5, and then we ask 4 people. So in this case, for instance, these 4 people rated item number 1 with scores 4, 4, 3, and 5. So it looks like this is positively correlated with self-esteem. If we go to item number 2, we have 2, 2, 1, and 3. So the scores here tend to be low. That means this item is negatively correlated with self-esteem, and so on and so forth. And then we go into step number 3. We sort the items by their median score. So what is the central tendency? And then by the dispersion, for example, by the interquartile range. So in our case, what we had is that the item with the highest score, with the highest median, was item number 1, median of 4, followed by item number 3, median 3.5, item number 5, median of 3, then item 2, and item 4. So according to these people, the item that best reflects a positive correlation with the concept of interest, which is self-esteem, is item number 1. The item that is the least correlated or that has the strongest negative correlation is item number 4. And so then we get these scores and we go to step number 4 and select the items at roughly equal intervals across the whole range of medians that we have. And if there are certain ties, we just break them by the interquartile range. Finally, we just shuffle. And so let's say that we choose item number 4, item number 1, because those are more positive, more negative, and then item number 5 because it's in the middle. and we just shuffle them. Let's say we come up with this order, 1, 5, and 1. And it's important that we don't just select based on statistics, the median and the interquartile range. Use common sense. If you see that two items are essentially telling the same, just choose one of them. Don't choose two because they happen to be at interval or equal intervals. Just always read the items and see that you don't have things like duplicates. And finally, in step number 5, we actually go ahead and administer the scale, meaning we get our subjects and we ask them this set of questions. And we ask them whether we agree or disagree with each of the statements. So let's say we ask a specific subject. These are the 3 answers. So this specific person agrees with item number 4, disagrees with item number 5, and agrees with item number 1. How do we turn this into a score? Because it looks like this specific person is agreeing only with one positive item and is disagreeing with a negative one and is agreeing with one that is negative. So it looks like in this case self-esteem is low. Again, how do we put this into a number? We have 2 options. The first one is computing the mean score of the items that the subject agrees with. So if we look at the answers here, the subject agrees with item number 1, which is very strong, so a 4, but also agrees with one that is quite low, 1.5. So what we compute is 1.5 plus 4 divided by 2 agreements. That's a total score of 2.75. And then in the second option, we just count how many items does the subject agree with, but important, correcting for direction. So in this case, we see that the subject agrees with item number 1 and the subject agrees with item number 4. But it turns out that item number 4 is actually a negative one. It tells us that a person agreeing with this item does not show self-esteem or has a low correlation with self-esteem. So in this case, it's only 1 out of 3. So that means 33%. Remember that item number 4 has to be reversed. So this is how we could build a Thurston scale to put a numerical quantity, 275 or 33%, on a highly complex concept such as self-esteem at work. How do we build a Likert scale? Well, we essentially start doing things different from the third step in which we were selecting the questions. In this case, we have 2 options. What we could do is remove the items with a low item total correlation, so those that are less consistent. So what we have to do here is take these scores given by this panel of judges and then compute the total score per judge. So in this case, the first person gave us scores 4, 2, 3, 1, 3. So that's a total of 13 points. The second judge gave us a total of 13 points as well. The fourth judge gave us a total of 18 points. So this is somehow showing the subjectivity of the scale, because for the same items, we have different people ranging anywhere from 13 to 18 points. And so what we have to do is compute the correlation between each of these items and this total score. So we have the first item has a correlation of 0.33. We have the fourth item has a correlation of 0.94, a very high correlation. So what we would do in this case is remove the items with the smallest correlation with the total. In this case, it would be items 1 and 2 because they have the lowest correlation. So they are the ones that are least correlated with the average, so to speak, with what the persons are actually telling us, according to their judgment, what is positive and what is negative. So that is one option. The other option could be this one over here. We just remove the items with a low range of scores, so the ones that are less discriminative. If we look at the case here, what we are computing is the interquartile range. So in the first item, we have a range of 0.5, second item again 0.5, 125, 1.25. So what we do is remove the ones that are clearly less discriminative. In this case, item number 5. We just remove it and we apply our scale with items 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the fourth step, again, is actually administering the scale. So we put them, let's say in paper, we give them to our subjects and we ask them to tell us how much they agree or disagree with each of the statements, but using more than just two possible answers. So we could go anywhere from strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. We could even go through 3 levels of 7 levels. It's up to us. So in this case, we are using 5 levels. And here are the answers that someone gave us. So this specific person was in disagreement with the statement, I am uncomfortable at work. This was statement number 2. Is in strong agreement with, I can't handle my job without assistance. It's neutral about, I feel like I make a useful contribution. And it's in agreement with the statement, I feel good about my work on the job. So these are the answers. How do we turn them into a numerical score? Well, what we do is sum the scores given to all the items. And here again, realize that sometimes we have to reverse the scores. So for example, item 2 and item 4. Why? Because this person tells us that they disagree with the statement, I am uncomfortable at work. So if this is a value of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, this value of 2 is actually not low in terms of correlation with self-esteem, because this is actually a negative statement. So these 2 should be turned into a 4 because it's a positive answer towards self-esteem. And then if we look at item number 4, which is over here, this is a negative statement. I can't handle my job without assistance. So this strongly agree is actually quite negative. It should turn into a 1. So if we go through the answers, we see that for item number 2, we got a answer of 4 after reversing. For item number 4, we got a 5 that after reversing is a 1. For item number 3, we got a neutral response, 3. And for item number 1, I feel good about my work on the job. We had an agreement, which is a score of 4. We just sum and get a final score of 12. So this is telling us there is a score of 12 with respect to self-esteem at work. It's again a very complex variable, a very complex construct that we can measure indirectly and put in a numerical quantity on it thanks to a scale. And something very important that I want to emphasize here a little bit is the difference between scales and single questions, because there's a huge confusion when you read online and you read the different studies. So we could use single questions that resemble a scale item. So think, for example, that someone is asking around this question as part of a survey. Corruption hampers economic development. Do you agree or disagree? Or does corruption hamper economic development? Strongly disagree, maybe I agree or strongly agree. It might look like this is a Thurston scale and this is a Likert scale, right? But it's just one single question. It's just that the scale we use for the answers resembles something like a Thurston scale or a Likert scale, but they are not. They're just one single question. So this doesn't make them scales. It's not that here the answer is a Likert scale. The Likert scale is a set of questions that are developed in a certain way, we've seen how, and whose answer is given in a certain way. But very often you're going to see places in which there's only one question and they offer a certain set of answers that looks like a Likert scale, but it's not. So if using numerical scales, like in this case, it's often a good idea to use positive and negative numbers to suggest agreement or disagreement. So instead of saying, in this case, strongly agree is 1, disagree 2, 3, 4, and 5, maybe a better answer in this case would be saying this is +2, +1, 0, -1, -2. Because there is this notion that positive means agreement, negative means disagreement, and then the magnitude tells us how much. Something that we have to think about is, should we include a neutral response, or do we want people to actually tell us positive or negative? There's no gray area. Positive or negative, you tell us. And we should be careful with the different problems of the actual words, the endpoints, the labels we put on those those numbers. Because there's a difference, for example, between strongly disagree or disagree a lot or very much disagree. Maybe some people given one of those specific answers feels like they have to argue for why disagree or why that much or why it's so important. It could make a difference, something to think about. And here's a very good representation of precisely this. So this is again a study from a few years ago in which they were asking the question, how good is good? Meaning we have here in the x-axis different words or different adjectives for the goodness or the quality of something, ranging from abysmal, appalling, dreadful, awful, terrible, very bad, etc., all the way to superb, brilliant, incredible, excellent, outstanding, perfect. And they were actually asking people, okay, get these adjectives and give them a score between 0 and 10 to tell us how good they are from worst to best. And over here we have the different distributions for each of the adjectives and even here the average score. And what's important here to know is that depending on which specific adjective we use, to people that might mean something different in this scale between 0 and 10 in this case. So it could be very different to ask them about something terrible over here or something that is quite bad, because it could be anywhere between 175 or 280. It could make a very big difference. Likewise, if we ask for simply really good over here or perfect. To people, that means different things. So this is something to think about when we are developing those scales and using specific words. Even funnier than this is that they did the same study in the US and in the UK. We have here in blue the US and UK in red, and we see that yes, the relative order is more or less maintained, but there are certain biases, especially over here in the negatives. So what to an American, something is abysmal, to a British could be, let's say, unsatisfactory or just bad. So you see, the words that we use play a role in the answers we get. And finally, just to mention indexes, they're used to give a quantitative score calculated according to certain rules through combining several other variables and reflect just one single general construct. So think about the happiness index. Let's say that we are interested in the relationship between happiness of people and something else. How do we measure happiness? Well, we could think about different dimensions or different concepts that could be correlated with happiness or that could lead to people being happier. Think about economic index. It could be something that relates to happiness in the sense that if the economy is good, if the family economy is good, then people tend to be happier because it's one less thing to worry about. So we could, for example, think about debt, the income or purchasing power of people. We could aggregate all those things into a single index, which is economic. We could think about environmental index. If there's pollution, then people are going to be less happy. If there's a lot of noise, a lot of traffic, then people generally are less happy. So we could think about an environmental index. Physical, employment, social. If we have a place in which there's a lot of divorces or crime or lawsuits, then people are going to be less happy in there. So we could aggregate all those variables into a general social index. And finally, we could even aggregate all this into a general happiness index. So by looking into all these different sources of data that are easily available in there, we could just start aggregating them into different indexes, economic, environmental, physical, etc., and ultimately put everything together in a happiness index that is going to allow us to have this easy to compute number, quantity, measuring somehow the happiness of people. And then we can look for relationships between this one variable and something else.